is Shatin, and I am the artistic director at Network for New Music. And today on our series Interviews with Composers, we have Judith Shatin, one of the composers who is going to be featured on our upcoming concerts, one here in Philadelphia on Saturday, January 27th, and we're repeating this program on Monday, January 29th in New York City. So please check our website for more information. So happy to have you here. Welcome, Judith, and hello.
Very happy to be joining you today and delighted that you will be performing Elijah's Chariot.
Indeed. Now, your catalog has works of such breadth and depth. It's really unmatched. And you explore and embrace both acoustic and electronic media. And we all know there's composers who are specialists, either in, say, a genre or an instrument, and others who touch on every area. But you sort of excel at this because you're not just an experimentalist. You really have a command of these diverse genres. Could you tell us how you came about to have such comprehensive knowledge?
That's a wonderful question, and I must say I'm probably as surprised as anyone could be. I do not have a strong technological background. I don't have any technological background. But over time, I just became really curious because I was coming of age right at the time when electronic media were first being created. And I just wondered, what could this world be? And when I was an undergraduate at Douglas College, that was back in the days of stringing bits of tape together and then using a special razor blade and tape to put them together. And I just found that, not so, how shall we say, inviting. And then I was a graduate student at Princeton, and they were using digital technology for the first time. And I was curious. And so I logged way too many hours in the building that had a basement where we would type out these cardboard note cards. And what we typed was read into a special machine that turned it into a digital tape that could then, in the middle of the night, be turned into sound in the engineering building. And as you can imagine, that also, not only was it not terribly inviting, but if you made a mistake, a typo, then your job wouldn't work and you wouldn't hear anything. And I didn't create any sounds that intrigued me more than traditional instruments. And it really was not until some years later when I was teaching at the University of Virginia and had the opportunity to apply for funding to start our computer music program that I went to a store in New York that sold digital items like pianos and different things and learned enough about MIDI, which allowed synthesizers to talk to computers and really was used by pop musicians a lot. And I got the grant and created the program. And somehow in my mind, I thought that there was something wonderful out there, and it was just a question of finding the right technology. And lo and behold, I think I was right, because although I will never, ever forsake traditional media, which I love, I have also found it just fascinating to see the transformative power of digital technologies, both for creating sounds from scratch, building up waveforms, and also for transforming the sounds of the world around us. So it really was a question of curiosity and just a sense that the sonic universe could be expanded, but never about replacing the wonderful world of acoustic instruments and voice with only digital technology. And at times I kind of pinch myself and wonder, how was it that I did this? And then sometimes think it would have been perhaps smarter to focus on one particular genre. But I've really loved the movement back and forth among all kinds of different instruments and and media. And I think that Elijah's Chariot is a wonderful case in point because it's a mix of one of the oldest instruments, a ram's horn, with digital processing and the world of acoustic string quartet. So it kind of moves across that whole boundary.
And I do want to talk more about that particular combination, but you have lived through and participated in many of these technology revolutions, as you were saying, from punching holes and splicing tape together through the establishment of the Virginia Center for Computer Music. And that was in what, 1987, 80?
Exactly, yes.
And now the digital revolution, you know, and imagine what you're seeing now. Give us your perspective now, because I know how much that has been part of your creative process.
Well, it's very interesting. I feel blessed because I was able to have deep experience of acoustic instruments before turning to digital
Mhm.
media. And it's taken a lot of time, and the field does continue to develop. And I think for all of us, we get to a point where we have decisions to make. I'm not interested in learning more and more programming because I want to keep my focus on music. So there are certainly technologies that are coming online now that I may not make use of. And in the end, I have to say, I've always felt that it's not about the technologies, but it's about just the imagination of composers and how we use technologies. Because when you think about it, instruments are all technologies. I'm still inventing and finding new sonic elements when I mess around with my piano. And in my collaborations, which I love with traditional performers, exploration of instruments that I think I know well always leads to new discoveries. So again, it's really a combination of those things.
And I'd encourage everyone to listen to the many recordings that have your music on them, including 4 portrait recordings, and I count it over 30 compilation recordings that feature your music. I was particularly moved by the recording of Rising on the Wings of Dawn, which that violin, that spectral opening sounds very much inspired by uh, your work in electronic. And yet you move through these moments of stillness and then activity, which feels really joyous. And then those beautiful harmonics at the end are just, I think embody some of those ideas that you were talking about, exploring new timbres in instruments. And then,
Well,
please.
so, well, I was just going to say, I think you make a really beautiful point because to me, it's not so much timbres for their own sake, although I find them important as experience, but what they are in service of. So in that particular piece that you mentioned, Rising on the Wings of Dawn, I'm very moved by metaphor and the idea of rising. And in that particular piece, across it, there is a rise through the entire range of the instrument. So timbre in that sense serves what the idea is, what the concept is of the piece.
And I also want to encourage listeners to visit some of your pieces that have quite a lot of humor in them that refer to electronic music, like your tape music,
Mhm.
which I quite enjoyed that video.
So that's a very different kind of piece, and yes, it is playful. And what happened is that I was kind of surprised that people are still talking about pieces for, say, violin and tape, when tape wasn't anywhere in evidence anymore. So I don't know why, but I just got the idea to go into a studio with all kinds of different tape, masking tape, electric tape, duct tape, you name it. And I ripped them and squashed them and messed around with them. And then I took the recordings that I made and created a stereo electronics piece. And then I did one actually for multi-channel, so you can hear it moving around an 8-channel setup. But I also did a version for any number of participants plus the stereo recording, and made little placards and came up with different kinds of actions that the performers could make. And it is humorous, but I premiered it with school children, and it was also a way to teach them about timbre and volume and collaboration and working with a conductor and all kinds of things about music, which these students were not familiar with. So it also had a kind of pedagogical aspect to it as well. But I really love the idea of also creating music for anyone who would like to play it. I have another piece called Zipper Music for amplified zipper players. And yes, I mean like this right here, and interactive electronics. So you never know where the next idea is going to come from.
Now, tell us more specifically about the combination of the ram's horn and the string quartet that appears in Eliza's Chariot.
So again, I was moved by the metaphor of the story. Not only the biblical passages, but also the legends that have grown up about Elijah. And I thought that it would be, that there was a possibility of creating a kind of linkage between the string quartet and the sounds of the shofar. And I wanted both to use an electronic of a recording that was simply recognizable, and then in other places where I would use transformations of it, again, playing with what these technologies can contribute. So I also should mention that there's a melodic theme in this piece inspired by the folk tune Eliyahu HaNavi, which is often sung at the close of this Sabbath. And the idea being that Elijah is going to come back. And it's a very simple tune, but somehow felt very resonant to me. So I built a lot of the expanded motifs from that. And in one spot in the piece, the string quartet actually hums that tune to make it completely clear. And the shape of the piece is inspired by the legend of Elijah with his followers, and then the quartet can be thought of as representing his followers and also of the chariot. So without it being program music in perhaps the traditional sense of the word, I was interested in trying to embody some aspects of the story in the music.
And revisiting what we were discussing before about rising on the wings of dawn, you mentioned in your program note that the electronic part represents heaven's call to Elijah and imitates a rising as well. Is that true?
Absolutely, that is true. And it's a very dramatic moment. It's much more maybe fraught than the kind of rising and rising on the wings of dawn. I mean, the idea of a chariot of fire is as, I mean, it's much more condensed maybe.
Now, you also have a lot of extended techniques throughout the quartet. Could you tell us a little bit about your use of like varying ways of playing pizzicato to playing col legno to even the microtonality?
Sure. I again use extended techniques, although basically most of these are, I mean, they're still extended techniques, but they are fairly common. Col legno using the wood of the bow, bouncing on the strings, and the types of pizzicato, I use some very strong plucking and some that's less pronounced. Let's see what other ones.
I really liked your use of the arrows.
Oh, so one of the big questions, and I'm struggling with it in a piece right now, is how to notate techniques that are not currently part of the lexicon. So in the microtonal spots, I used arrows to indicate slight rises or the opposite. Although one can also just simply use notations for quarter tone. If you want a specific amount, you can use quarter tone or other similar kinds of indications. But there are many instances where I find I'm having to make my own icons or figure out how to convey to performers. Sometimes it's a combination of words and graphics. So it really depends. When I was trying to come up with notation for my zipper music piece, I came to realize that traditional music notation would not do at all. And I spent probably at least as much time inventing just what became very simple arrows over time or ways of showing triplet rises. I mean, you can do a lot of different sounds. You can do a lot of different rhythms. Like, how are you going to notate that? So, I mean, that's humorous, but one really needs to think about that in compositional designs. Right now, I'm doing a piece for marimba and vibraphone, and I've been studying percussion for the last couple of years with a wonderful percussionist here, Yijian Fang, and I've come up with new techniques for the marimba, and I'm really struggling mightily right now with exactly how to notate them. So there are a
Well,
lot of
I found some of your notation just to be spectacular and beautiful. In particular, that towards the end of the piece, when you have the written out directions for what is probably the most extended indeterminate part of the piece, it's just stunning and beautiful to look at. And
well,
I imagine quite inspirational to the performers.
my goal is always to be as transparent as possible to performers. And one of the things that I've certainly discovered over the years is that they love having words in addition to musical notation. Just a word like nervous or excited or, whatever it may be, gentle. It helps them because the dots on the page tell you what to play, and we have dynamics notation, but somehow just setting a mood, giving just a little notational touch that can help them understand can be really meaningful. And for me, music, it is of course conceptual, but it's also, it does touch the emotion. It does involve, for want of better term, mood. And so I use quite a few words in all of my scores as well.
And I know our musicians are particularly inspired by it and enjoy it as we've all been working together in rehearsals, preparing for your concert. Um, and just want to remind our audiences that we would be featuring Judith Shatin's Eliza's Chariot for Electronics and String Quartet here in Philadelphia on Saturday, 27 January. And we're going to repeat this concert on Monday, January 29th in New York City. So please see our website for more information about tickets. And Judith, thank you so much for joining us today on our interviews with composers.
Thank you so very much.